starts up. So feel free to take advantage of the morning. So with that, Dr. Mike Jones is cotton specialist with Clemson Extension based at the PD Research Center there in Florence, and he's going to share with some of his variety data that everybody always looks forward to in making seed purchase. So Mike, we'll turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, David and Josh. I appreciate you guys putting this thing together. I would much rather be there with you guys in person, but hopefully next year we'll get to do that. I'm going to try to share my screen. Can you guys see that?
Yes, sir. Looks good.
All right. Well, today I'm going to talk to you a few minutes, give you an update on the 2020 cotton cropping review and a little bit of what happened across the cotton belt, and of course what happened here in South Carolina. And then I'm going to finish up with maybe 15 minutes of some of the new varieties that are available for you guys and how they performed in our variety trials. This is U.S. upland cotton acres for the last 20 years. And the way this is set up, the orange bars are the planted acres and the blue bars are the harvested acres. You can see all the way over 2020, we planted 11.8 million acres of cotton this past season across the U.S. cotton belt. And you can see that's down from the previous 3 years. The big thing here is look at the blue bar. It's only 8.5 million is what we harvested. So there was about 3.3 million acres that was not harvested. Most of that was out of Texas. They had some pretty dry conditions and lost a lot of their dryland acres in Texas. Here we have U.S. upland cotton yield, again, over the last 20 years. This past year, the USDA has us at about 813, which is right in there where we were last year, but down from the previous 3 years. This is the same data, except this time I plotted it and put a linear regression through it. And I always like to show this slide at cotton meetings just to talk a little bit about the progress that we've made as an industry over the last 30, 40 years. And you can see it's a linear regression here, positive. We are increasing our cotton yields about 8.9 pounds per year since 1975. And I think that's just outstanding. A lot of that is improved genetics. The varieties that we're planting, our seed companies have done a really good job with these new varieties. But a lot of it also is improved management, better nematode control. The transgenic traits have helped us for sure, our fertility practices and that sort of thing. So I'd like to see that increase keep going. You can see here, if you can see my pointer, these last 3 years we've kind of come down, but again, that's off of 895, which is our record yield we set in 2017. So hopefully, if environmental conditions are better than they've been the last 2 or 3 years, hopefully our yields will be up here on this side of the line. This is U.S. upland cotton production, bale production. And of course, if our acreage is down and our yields are kind of average, our production is going to be down. So we're estimated at 14.4 million acres this past season. One good thing that came out of this year's crop, though, is one of the best fiber quality crops that we've had. This is fiber length for the U.S. crop over the last 40 years. And you can see, just like yield, we've been able to make significant increases in our fiber lengths. Again, a lot of that is through these really good varieties that are being developed by the industry. And outstanding crop here in 2020. You can see over 37 on our length, so a record length for us. We kind of get the same kind of trend when we plot fiber strength over the last 40 years. Again, a positive increase. So again, we're doing a lot of good things in our fiber quality, which is very important for us to make sure that we have a market share, since we do export so much of our cotton. This is some information from Dr. Bill Meredith. He was a geneticist at Stonewall, Mississippi with USDA. He's passed away now, but he did some work trying to look where the percent variation was for fiber quality parameters. And a lot of strength and length, of course, is controlled by the variety you plant, the genetics. But you can see that the environment also plays a key role with the fiber lengths and strengths that we get at the end of the year. And genetics is really the player here. So I guess the point I'm trying to make here with this slide is that if you plant really, really good cotton varieties that have high fiber quality, and we get into some kind of stress year where we have drought or high heat, and our fiber lengths kind of take a hit, if you planted a variety that has above average fiber length to begin with, there's a chance you're not going to have any problems. But if you plant one that's kind of average in length or strength, or below average, and then we run into these stressful conditions, then you might have some fiber discounts. Micronair and color, of course, is a different story. A lot of that's controlled by the environment, but there is some genetic control there too, some genetic variation. Sorry about that. Got to turn my phone off. This is Micronair. You kind of see a similar trend with yield, and that's not unusual because, of course, Micronair is fiber density. So as breeders are increasing fiber yield over time, they're going to probably also increase Micronair. But you can see it's not as big an increase, and that's a good thing for us. It keeps us out of high mic discounts. And you can see this past year in 2020, we had really low mics. So we had a really good fiber package, fiber quality. We didn't have any hurricanes or major weather events during the harvest season when our bowls were open. So this shows the color grades of cotton in the Southeast through the classing offices. Of course, Virginia, North Carolina, and South Carolina come through the Florence office, and you can see the grades through the Florence classing office were really good, a lot better than I expected. This is Rayville, Louisiana. You know, they had several hurricanes come through there, and I'm surprised that their grades were as good as they were. But most of the cotton out of the Mid-South and the Southeast was really good. Now switch gears a little bit and let's talk about varieties planted. This is percent market share for the cottonseed companies across the United States. SE is the Southeast. MS would be the Mid-South market, Southwest market. W would be the West market. And this is the entire U.S. Cotton crop. And I got this information out of the Ag Marketing Service Bulletin, Cotton Varieties Planted Bulletin they put out every August, September. And you can see here in the Southeast, we plant quite a bit of Delta pine cotton. Over half of varieties that we plant are Delta pine varieties. Next market share goes to Americot with 33%, Phytogen 10, Stonewall 6. You can see Delta pines also planted on quite a few acres in the Mid-South with 65%, and out west, Americot's the most popular variety in the Southwest of Texas region. Now I've got several of these slides I'm going to show you in succession here, so I'm going to explain them a little bit. They're all set up the same. The orange writing here is the harvested acres for each state. The number underneath is the average yield estimated by USDA Ag Statistics Service, and up top are the most popular varieties that were planted in each region. So you can see in the Southeast, Delta pine 1646 was the most popular variety, and it's planted across the region. As estimated, it was on 33% of all the acres in the Southeast. Next gen 5711 was next, and it was on about 20% of the acres. So those two varieties made up over 50% of the acres in the Southeast. We did plant 2.3 million acres. When we did harvest 2.3 million acres of cotton this past year in the Southeast, and we averaged 838 pounds to the acre, which I think is really good. You can see the Carolinas with all the problems that we had this year with the environment and getting our plots in. You can see we took a little bit of a hit with 785 pound average for North Carolina, and again we were at 778. The Mid-South had one of their best years. Talking to their cotton specialist, they got off to a really good start, and they had real timely rainfall, pretty good temperatures, nothing too extreme, so their crop was outstanding. They planted a lot of Delta pine 1646 in this region. Over 50% of all the cotton acres in the Mid-South went to this one particular variety. Next gen 4936, I believe, was on another 10% of the acres. So those two varieties, again, were heavily planted in this region. 1.7 million acres was harvested, and you can see the tremendous yields that they had, 1,132 pounds. Arkansas and Missouri probably had the best crops, but I think Louisiana and Mississippi also had outstanding crops until those two hurricanes came through back to back and took out a little bit of their crop. Southwest, of course, Texas is the big player here. 4.2 million acres harvested. Their yields were kind of average for them, 641 pounds across the region. And they also plant quite a bit of 1646 in this Texas market. And it was their most popular variety. Not a lot of cotton planted anymore out in the West, Arizona, California. Most of this upland cotton acres is probably in seed increase. They only had 156,000 acres in this particular region. As far as South Carolina in particular, we planted 190,000 acres. Again, a lot of that was not intentional, that our decrease was down. We had some really poor planting conditions. It was estimated we were going to be in about the 300,000 acre range at the beginning of the planting season. Of course, we were only get 190,000 planted. You can see that's down from 2019. We were able to harvest most of our cotton. We had a really good harvest season, 185,000 acres harvested. And again, our yield was estimated this year at 778 pounds, which I thought was a little bit high, but I think the southern part of the state really brought that average up. They had some pretty good cotton down below the lakes. And some of our late planted cotton really came on at the end and made really good yields. 300,000 bales is what we were estimated to produce this year. Same kind of setup with our average yields in South Carolina over the last 40 years. And you can see it's a linear increase also. A lot more variability in this data because of the way we produce cotton. We are dry land, about 80% dry land in the state on sandy soils. So when it rains, we can make pretty good yields. And when it's hot and dry, we fall below this line here. But for the most part, we've increased our yields about 7 to 8 pounds per year over the last 40 years, which is very good. As far as the Southeast market share, we're heavily planted into Delta pine. Again, a lot of it 1646 is estimated that 63% of our crop was planted to Delta pine varieties, with 49% in Georgia and 41% in North Carolina. North Carolina plants a little bit more earlier maturing varieties. A lot of the phytogen material does pretty good up there. And then Georgia prefers a more full season, so they plant a lot more of the Americot cottons. In particular, the varieties that were most popular, again, 46% of our acreage was 1646. Next gen 5711 picked up another 11%. And then you guys can see the other varieties, 1840, 2055, 4936, and 5007. Similar trend with the 1646, but some of that acreage going into some of these other varieties. I talked a little bit about this already, but I wanted to go over some of the issues that we were faced with. It was probably one of the worst planting conditions, at least up north in the PD area, that I can remember in a long time. We got off to a good start in late April, the first week of May, and we were able to get some cotton in the ground. But then a cold front came through with real cold temperatures and heavy rainfall. I think here at the station, we got 2.5 inches of rain out of that front, which put us out of the field for about a week. And then we were able to plant again for a few days. And then Tropical Storm Bertha came through. And this one dumped 6 to 9 inches, depending on where you are on our field. So pretty much put our May planting out of commission. We had some acreage go in late. A lot of cotton was planted that last week of May, first 2 weeks of June, or replanted during that time. We faced some excessive heat in July, which resulted in some poor early fruit set with some of this late planted cotton. But surprisingly, we had good rainfall in late August and early September and late September, which really made this late crop. And some of that late material late planted material really looked good. We had good boll loading late in the season. And because we didn't have any major hurricanes or late frost and had pretty good temperatures, we made decent yields on this late crop. And I already went through the fiber quality. It was outstanding. This is average rainfall, and what I did here was compare the 25-year average for Florence to what we had this past season. And the month of May during planting, you can see we got almost 13 inches of rain. Pretty good rainfall during June and July. A little bit dry in early August, but rain started at the end of August and stayed through September, again, which allowed us to make that late crop. And then pretty good harvest conditions here with not a rainfall during that time. Now let's switch gears a little bit and talk about some of these new varieties. It's probably the most important decision that you guys are going to make in managing your crop. The variety you select kind of sets your genetic potential or your yield potential and your fiber quality potential. So if you do a bad job of selecting your variety, you've already lowered that bar a little bit. So if you select high yielding, high quality varieties, then anything that you do with your management after that only pulls down from that. But it is very important. There's a lot of criteria that you can use for variety selection. Of course, we get paid for yield. So yield potential is going to be number one. And what I mean by that, that variety has to have the genetic potential to make 4 or 5, 6 bale cotton if everything is perfect. But you also want to have varieties that not only have this genetic potential to make high yields, but are able to make these yields over many different situations, management situations or environmental conditions. So yield stability and yield potential, I highlighted those in orange because those are the most important things. Fiber quality is also important, and I talked about that a little bit earlier, how important fiber quality is. Especially this year, we've probably got some new varieties that are high yielding that are coming onto the market. And I want you guys just to be aware of some of the fiber quality that may go along with some of those before you decide to put them in the field on your farm. Of course, value-added traits are very important. We've got a lot of good traits that help us manage the crop, insect-resistant traits, herbicide-resistant traits, but to me, that's not the most important thing for me because there's a lot of choices out there. Again, yield potential and fiber quality need to be above that. Plant maturity, we have a tendency to plant a lot of later maturing varieties in South Carolina, but I think there's a lot of early maturing varieties that also do really good here. And we're probably missing that opportunity to use those to our advantage in managing our crop. Dr. Mueller is going to talk to you a little bit after me about nematode resistance. And we are fortunate now that we do have varieties that have root knot nematode resistance and a few that have reniform nematode resistance. And the yields on these varieties look really good, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But if you have fields that has high levels of nematode resistance, it would be a good idea to use this management to your advantage and plant these resistant varieties. And of course, storm-proofness and lint percent and leaf hairiness are also important. But what you've got to do really is you got to study the data. You've got to do your homework. Again, it's very important that you do a good job of selecting varieties, but you just don't want to use the data by itself. You want to temper it with your experience. Unfortunately, we can't put a variety trial on every field that you have, or you can't put one on every field, so you really don't know which variety is the best one for that particular location. The best thing you can do is to try to hedge your bets. You're kind of guessing that this variety is going to do well when you put it in the field. And if you have varieties that are high yielding that seem to be stable over a lot of different environments, you've got a pretty good chance of doing that. One thing I don't think we do good enough a job of is spreading our risk over variety, maturity, and planting date. We kind of put all our eggs in one basket. We like a lot of late maturing varieties, and we plant them all at one time, and we try to harvest them all at one time. But I think we could do a better job there of spreading out our crop. And then purchasing quality seed. We have had some issues with germination over the last few years. I know there's been some articles in some of the journals about that. Guys, these seed are really expensive, so you want to make sure that you're getting the best quality seed you can. Make sure you're checking on the germ. The warm germ should be on the tag, and you guys can't ask for the cold germ. It should be up over 60%. And if you want to, or you can, it would probably be a really good idea for you to at least retain a little bit of the seed from each lot in case you do have problems, and then you can get it tested, or we can test it for you to see what the problem is. There are a lot of sources for variety information. I think the best source to use is the University Small Plot Replicated OVT variety trials we do. These are non-biased trials. They're replicated. These varieties are grown side by side, and then we take yield and fiber quality data out of them to see which ones are performing the best. Normally, when I have a meeting, I'll bring handouts to you, hard copies, and give you all the information from our OVTs. Fortunately, I cannot do that, but here is the website. We do have all of our variety trial information posted on the Clemson variety trial website. I urge you also to use the Georgia data and the North Carolina data, and I did check, and all of that data is already on their websites. So you guys can take a shot at it. Yes.
We included your data in the chat box here for anybody who wants to download it as well.
Very good. I appreciate that, David. Thank you. All right. Also, if you guys ever see any university or industry large plot trials, usually they're signed, go out there and look at those cotton plants and look at those trials. We don't have as many of those as we used to. It used to be a normal thing, but if you see one, stop by and look. And of course, your own experience and your neighbors, the cotton varieties that do well for them are probably some of the best things to use. Like I say, we try to do these variety trials and spread them over areas that have a lot of cotton acreage, but there's no guarantee that those varieties that do well in our trials are going to work on your farm. But we do. So as you look through all of this information, you're going to get overwhelmed, and it's easy to get lost in the numbers. This is just one of the trials that I do. This is a small one, actually. This was the early maturing cotton variety trial, dryland trial at the PD Rec this past year. I think it had 40 varieties in it. The late trial actually had close to 50 varieties in it. So you can see the yields of these trials, and I don't want you to go in and try to look for each variety and how it performed. The point I'm trying to make here is we included this Delta Pine 1646 as a maturity check in our early trial, and it actually was the highest yielder, believe it or not, and made 1,203 pounds. We also included Next Gen 5007 as another maturity check because I've got a lot of experience with those two varieties, and it only made 556 pounds. So if I happened to plant 5007 in this field instead of 1646 last year, that would have cost me 647 pounds at 70 cents. That's about $450. That's why I was saying that variety selection is really important. Now let's talk a little bit about the OVTs. I'm not going to present slide after slide after slide of data like this because you'll get lost in it. So what I'm going to try to do is summarize this data for you. We were able to plant 5 locations for early maturing OVTs this year. I was able to get one in at Dillon with Daniel Baxley. We got the 2 in here in Florence, a dryland and an irrigated. And then at Edisto, they were also able to plant a dryland and irrigated. And I didn't include every variety down this column. I just picked the ones that I thought you guys might be interested in or purchasing this year and listed those. And the way this again is set up, the trial mean is listed at the bottom, and I put it from the lowest yielding environment this particular year, which was 910 pounds, which was not bad, all the way up to the Blackville irrigated trial, which was pushing 2,000 pounds. Just a tremendous crop they had there. So to talk about a little bit, and then I highlighted those varieties that were in the top 10. So to me, any of these varieties that are in this gray area, they had a really good year in our OVTs across South Carolina, and would probably be some that I would be interested in taking a look at on my farm. The best variety this year was Delta Pine 2012. It's a new early maturing variety, and you can see it led the Blackville irrigated trial and made 2,448 pounds, which is a lot of cotton. The average over all 5 locations was 1,474. Delta Pine also had another good variety, 2020, that performed well this year. So they had 2 that I would be interested in. Stonewall actually had 3 that looked really good in our trials this year. This 5091 was actually an experimental, and they just recently renamed it. But you can see it averaged 437 pounds. 4550 has been around a few years. Hasn't done as well in the past as it did this year, but it averaged 1,405 over the 5 locations. So it had a really good year. And then 4990. Some of the varieties that surprised me, these Dynagrows, 3799, 3615, and the 3456. You can see the 3456 led the Dillon trial, and the 3799 led the Blackville dryland trial, and almost made 2,000 pounds. That was a tremendous crop there. They looked really good this year. They stood out. And then this Next Gen 3729 also looked really good. Phytogen 500 had a good year. It was included in both the late and the early, and I'll show you that data in a few minutes on the late trial. But it also had a good year. Now, again, I've put the varieties in from highest yield down to lowest yield, and I've highlighted the top 10, and I'm going to keep that format for the next few slides, because I wanted to point out that some of these newer varieties, even though they're higher yielding, there may be something that you might want to take a look at as far as some of the fiber quality characteristics of these varieties. So I wanted to take a look at that. So again, the highest yielding down to the lowest. And then over here, I averaged all the fiber lengths for those varieties. And you can see the 2 Delta Pine varieties actually are high yielding, and they have outstanding fiber length. So anything that's in green would have been above the average for the trials. So above average fiber length. And then anything in the red kind of is a little bit of a red flag. Not that it was bad, but it was below the average for the trial. So just something to be aware of with 4550. I don't remember seeing this before, but it occurred this year with the high yields. that the fiber length was down just a little bit. And then you can see that some of these varieties down here, the new 332 from Phytogen, even though it wasn't in the top 10 in yield, it yielded fairly well, and it's got a really good fiber length. And then a couple you might want to watch out for down here at the bottom. Fiber strength, again, looking at fiber strength, most of these in the black, that means they're right on average, so there's no problems there with the fiber strength of these newer varieties. The 3615, I was impressed with the fiber strength package there. It's a high yielding variety and has really strong fiber. So that was impressive. The 3456, not quite so. It was a little bit below average. And then all of the Phytogen varieties, a lot of these newer Phytogen varieties have really, really good fiber strength. Didn't really see a problem with any of them in micron there. I highlighted 2 that were above the average, but this is nothing that's going to be discounted. But it could if we, if we got into some kind of stress, hot weather with not a real high boll load, you could see some problems there with the 3799 and possibly the 3729. All right, I know most of us plant the late maturing cotton varieties, so let's talk about them. Of course, 1646 is kind of the gold standard here. It has been for the last 4 years, and you can see it did well this year too. It averaged 1,409 pounds and led the Florence irrigated trial. Interesting thing to me is there were some varieties that actually did a lot better than 1646. Some of them are new. This Armor 9371 was an experimental that they just named, and as well as this 9608. And both of those varieties, they kind of stood out when we drove the picker through the field. They looked really good. Again, this 3615 was in the early trial and was in the, I think, ranked 4th there. It was 2nd here with the late maturing varieties and actually led the Dillon location and the Blackfoot Dryland with 2039, which was a tremendous crop. I don't know much about H959, but it looked really good and it has really good fiber. And then the 1702. So Dynagrow had some really good cotton to look at this year in our trials. Delta Pine 2038 was also very good. It averaged 1,400 pounds, right there close to 1646, probably not much difference in those. And then Next Gen 3195 is a new variety from Next Gen that you might want to take a look at. Stonewall 5471 led the Florence Dryland trial here. And did fairly well at all the locations. So again, another outstanding variety. And then I mentioned 500 early from Phytogen. It also did well in our late maturing trials. Again, the same format, looking at fiber length. Now this is the thing that bothers me just a little bit with some of these newer high yielding varieties that are going to be released, is the fiber lengths on a lot of these were below the average for the trial. And they're definitely lower than what we've been used to growing. A lot of our acres is already in 1646, and you can see the fiber length of 1646 and how these other varieties kind of fall with fiber length compared to 1646. Fiber strength. The Armor 9608 also had low fiber length, also has low fiber strength compared to the rest of the varieties in this trial, and you can see that with the Armor 3885 also. Again, the one that did impress me was this H959, and you can see it's a high yielding variety and has really good fiber strength. And then really nothing with the micron there. Maybe 2038 a little bit high, but that's nothing to worry about. All right, I usually hand out the Lint yield rankings table that I do for you guys in the Southeast. I like to not only use the South Carolina data, but I kind of like to check these varieties to see how good they are in North Carolina and Georgia. So I kind of summarize all this information for you from their OBTs. And this data can be found on the Variety Trial website, and it's also on our extension website. So you guys can get on there and access that. I really like to do this kind of thing because the more you play with it and look at it, the more information you can get out of it. And what I've got are the number of Southeast variety trials that this variety was entered in that I could find data for in the Southeast, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia, and I listed those separate for you. And this is the percent of those trials in the top 25% in yield, which means it led the trial. Statistically, there was probably no difference in any of those. The top half, and then anything that finished at the bottom. The interesting thing is that like this Armor 9371, which I just talked about doing so well in our trial, you can see it actually did better in North Carolina and Georgia. So that tells me that the data that we got from South Carolina was legit. I mean, this variety really did a good job in the Southeast this year. Some interesting things also, Stonewall 5091, you see it was in 18 trials this year, actually did better in North Carolina than it did in Georgia. And you can see it's kind of a stair step there. So if I was a grower in maybe the PD area, this might be one that I would be interested in. But if I was down below the lakes, you see it didn't do as well. The further south we went, maybe I want to plant something else like this 3615. You can see the yields are better the further south we go. So it may be better suited for below the lakes. But anyway, there's a lot you can do with this. This is the top 10, and the good thing that I see here is the same varieties that did well in South Carolina are doing well in North Carolina and Georgia also. This is combined data. You can see the top 10 here, and normally 1646 would be at the top of this list in my tables in years past, but you can see all the new material that was released this year that has done well. One that we had 2 years worth of data on was this 3615. If I can find my mouse. 3615. It was in 37 trials, and you can see it's done just as well as 1646. All right, so taking that sheet, Lint yield ranking sheet, and numbering them 1 through, I think there's maybe 65 or 70 listed on there, and ranking them from high to low. I kind of took that sheet and then grouped all the varieties for you by the seed company. And this is the Delta Pine varieties, and you can see that the 2012, 2115, 1646, 2020, and 2038 all were in the top 20. And the way I look at it, if these varieties are in the top 20 across the Southeast, they're probably really good yield stability, yield potential, and probably something that I would want to look at. The thing that bothers me a little bit here is we've got a lot of acres in the Southeast in 1840, 1851, and we did in 2055 this year. And for some reason, they're not doing as well in our OVTs in the Southeast. They may be performing on growers' farms, but I'm not sure. But I just wanted to point that out. Here's the next gen varieties. This is the new one that they're going to release, and it was an experimental, so I don't expect they're going to have a lot of seed. They may have ramped up production, I don't know. But you can see it did really good in our trials. We do have a lot of acres in this 4936, 5007, and 5711, and they're not quite as high in our trials as I'd like to see them for those particular varieties. Here's the Phytogen and List varieties. They have an experimental that I hope they're going to turn into a commercial variety soon that looks really good. And then these 3 nematode resistant varieties, 400, Phytogen 500, and 443, are all right around that 20 rank, which I think they have a lot of potential here in South Carolina and could do a good job for us, especially if we have root knot nematode. The Stonewall cotton varieties, they've got several that look good. The 5091 was ranked 3rd. Again, it's a new variety, so I don't know how much seed they're going to have of that. I included 4946. It's an old variety that's still sold, but it's not entered in our OVTs anymore. So I'm not sure availability on that one. I talked about the 4550 being a good variety this year and how well it did in our trials. And then again, these were the ones that surprised me. These Dynagrow varieties, don't have a lot of experience with them other than being in the OVT the last few years. But there's 5 here that look really good. They had outstanding yield in our trials. And then of course the Armor varieties, and some of us have grown 3885. It used to be Cropland Genetics, and they changed the name from Cropland Genetics or CG to Armor. And it's still looking good in our OVTs. And then these 2 new ones that I think they will be releasing next year also look really good. All right. So Dr. Mueller is going to talk to you a little bit about nematodes and some diseases next. So I wanted to kind of group the root knot nematode resistant varieties together. There is they're not up in the top 10, but there are several in this 20 range that you can use to manage nematodes, especially if you have high levels of nematodes. I didn't include the new Delta Pine varieties because they did not enter them in our OVTs this year. So I don't have a lot of yield information on those, but I think in some of our strange trials, they've looked really good. To try to get an idea, I'm often asked if we plant these root knot nematode resistant varieties, what are we giving up if we don't plant 1646? And I don't have any head-to-head trials in nematode infested areas, but I pulled this data out of the OVT. This is the early, and I had Delta Pine 1646 in 3 trials in the early with some of these varieties and compared to yield. And it made 1,202 pounds over these 3 trials, and you can see the yield of the nematode resistant varieties is down, maybe an average of 200 pounds maybe. But if you look at the late trial where I had the comparison of 5 comparisons with 1646, if you look at like Phytogen 500, that's only a 60-pound difference. And that's probably not even going to be statistical. So I don't think you're giving up as much as people think. So I'd like to thank some folks for all they do for our program in Clemson. Of course, the Cotton Board and Cotton Incorporated for funding a lot of our research, our industry partners for funding research and helping us with some of these good varieties that's developing. And of course, the county agents and you guys that help let me put trials on your farm. So with that, I'm going to stop, David, and I appreciate everything. And I'll take a few questions, or maybe they can go through the chat room or call me later if they have questions.
All right, thank you, Mike. We appreciate that that update. I don't see any questions in the chat right now, but I do encourage y'all to use the chat as we go forward. If you have any questions, or at the end we'll open up for some questions, or however it goes. And we will be submitting this video out and all that data information will be sent to everybody that registered after we get it all wrapped up. Hannah, you going to introduce Dr. Mueller for us?
Sure, I'd be glad to. Dr. Mueller has been a longtime asset to Clemson University and the research station down in Edisto. He's also an avid fisher. And he is a great resource when it comes to answering some field questions on nematodes and diseases. He's been a great asset to our PD and below the lakes, and is going to provide us with some great information today. And Dr. Mueller, I'll give it to you.
All right.
There he is.
Let's see if I can.
There you go.
We good?
You might need to go up to the top there and do the,
How about that?
there you go. That's it.
Okay. Thank you, Hannah and David. I'm really glad you're having this meeting. It's a shame we can't all get out and visit. I think there's a lot of exciting things going on in agriculture in general, but especially cotton and nematodes and nematode resistant varieties. But there's several other things going on. We've had an interesting 3 or 4 years with some different diseases, and I'll go through those first. Fortunately, we've avoided some of the problems that they've had, say, in Southwest Georgia, especially in Alabama. 3 years ago, they found this cotton leaf roll dwarf virus. They had some fields they thought they had a lot of damage from, but in the last 2 years, we've had a pretty extensive little project in South Carolina looking for this. We don't see the damage that they see. We're able to find Dr. Green and Dr. Wang, who are here. They've done quite a bit of work on this, done some survey work. We can find quite a bit of this virus, but it's very low incidence in the fields. And the bottom line for us is we're having a very, very hard time showing any yield loss. The picture on the slide here, the symptoms are very variable. They include shortened internodes, they include stunted plants, but the most common thing is the symptom you see here. And I think when most people see this, the first thing they think of is going to be herbicide 2,4-D type damage. So you're going to have a hard time determining what's the herbicide damage, what's actually from the virus. If you've got this in your field and you're concerned, I'd suggest you get a hold of your county agent. They'll probably get somebody like Jeremy or myself to look at it. We actually have to do an extraction and find the virus to confirm it's there. But if you notice on my slide on the left, the bottom line literally is we can't show yield losses to this thing in South Carolina. And hopefully that's going to be the story for the next several years to come. The one story about this is it's transmitted by aphids. You would think if you can control all your aphids, you wouldn't have the virus, but that hasn't been the experience. You can do a lot of work with your aphids, but you'll still get the virus. So if you want to control aphids to control aphids and aphid damage, that's great, but don't think that's going to control your virus. For the last 5 years, we've dealt with bacterial blight. Once again, this has been a very serious problem in the lower Mid-South. It's been a problem in Georgia, but for us, we've not had much of this, and yield losses where we have had it have been fairly minimal. We haven't had the kind of damage they've seen in other parts of the country. Most of this is about the variety you plant. There's a lot of resistant varieties. Most of the phytogen lines are resistant. Unfortunately, most of the Delta pine lines that we like to grow are susceptible. You need to go, if you're worried about bacterial blight, you need to check the company information sheets, see if you can find a resistant variety, and that'll be fine. Unfortunately, there's no chemical control for this. When you see symptoms, there's nothing you can go out and spray. A fungicide will not control a bacterial disease. But once again, we're not losing a lot of sleep over this one, at least in South Carolina, because our yield losses have been very limited, and we're getting more and more resistant varieties. So never get a whole night's sleep when you've got diseases coming in, new diseases coming in on the cotton crop. And 2 years ago, we had false mildew. In a few of the fields where we saw this, it was quite severe and probably caused a 10–15% yield loss. But fortunately, last year, the second year we had this, it was actually kind of hard to find. I've only had reports of 10 or 12 fields, and they really felt like their yield losses were minimal. So if you grew a variety last year and it got area light mildew, if you're worried about it this year, I'd switch varieties. We think there are some varieties that are less susceptible that you could say were resistant. The trouble with both false mildew and with the target spot, which we're about to look at, is they don't occur commonly enough that we can really get a chance to rate the varieties. What would be great, what would cause Mike Jones to lose 2 or 3 nights sleep, but if we could get an epidemic in one of the variety tests, then we could really rate the varieties and generate some good information on that. But so far, that hasn't happened. Target spot, which I mentioned, I think a lot of us, 4 or 5 years ago, when this came out, it was pretty devastating. We saw a lot of defoliation, a lot of premature defoliation. Fortunately, it was primarily in the bottom of the canopy. A lot of these leaves were starting to senesce naturally. And so the yield losses, even though severity was high, the yield losses were fairly low. We sprayed a lot that year. I know a lot of growers who sprayed. They were happy they sprayed, but then they told me they didn't really think it affected the yield. The spraying didn't really help that much. So this is kind of a mixed bag. Part of the story on the foliar diseases, things like areolate mildew and target spot, they're real. We need to be worried about them. But if you look on this slide, a lot of these foliar diseases are these little spots. This is Ascochyta or alternaria. They're really brought on Stemphylium. These diseases are really brought on by natural senescence or by nutrient deficiencies in the sandy areas of our field. Spraying for those is not going to increase your yields, but if you are worried about the areolite mildew, if you've had problems with that, or especially if you've had problems with target spot, these things overwinter in the same fields. They overwinter on debris. So if you grow cotton 2 or 3 years in a row, every year you grow cotton in a field where you're having this problem, it's going to get worse and worse. So if you have fields like that you feel you need to plant, you may want to consider this Georgia. This is their recommended control fungicide spray program. They like to spray between the 1st and the 3rd week of bloom. This is before you're going to see symptoms. So you have to make this decision, and you're doing a little gambling, is that you were going to have the disease and you're going to control it. That's why you go into fields with a history of target spot. A history of fields that have a lot of premature defoliation, those would be the two types of fields that I would target. Certainly your irrigated fields, I would be more prone to spray those fields than my dryland fields. And if you get to the second or third week of bloom and you're projected to have some wet weather, we're projected to have a hurricane or a stormy week or two, the higher the chance of rain, the more benefits you're going to get from any of the fungicide sprays. So it's a iffy situation whether or not to spray. These are the fungicides that are labeled. These are all labeled. They're not listed in any particular order. All of them work fairly well. What you might want to look at as you look at this is some of them have one, some of them have two active ingredients. The ones that have two active ingredients tend to give you a longer period of protection. If it's got one active ingredient, you'll get protection for a week and a half, 2 weeks. If you have two active ingredients, especially the newer active ingredients tend to have a little more residual activity. You might stretch out 3 or 4 weeks, and the longer the activity, the better off you are. So I had this picture on my opening slide. This is the Root Knot Fusarium Wilt Nursery in Tallahassee, Alabama. I actually took this picture. I visited there about 20 years ago. This is where all of the breeding programs, commercial breeding programs, or the state and USDA breeding programs, this is where they brought their material to get a nice uniform test. Everybody could compare themselves to everybody else. And as you look across this field, you'll see things don't look very good. We've come a long way in those 20 years. The breeders have really worked hard to find resistance to Fusarium wilt, to find resistance to root knot nematode. The two used to be linked. Now they're basically separated. In South Carolina, we have pretty good resistance. You don't see a lot of Fusarium wilt, but we do see a lot of root knot nematode, and we do see a lot of reniform nematode. But as Mike alluded to, we've come a long way. We've got some varieties now that look like they're going to work. And right away, I'll mention what he showed you. The big concern in the past, periodically, every 5 or 6 years, somebody would release a root knot resistant variety, but it never sold very well because the yield drags were very, very real. If you planted it in a field that had no nematodes, you would get a 200, 300 pound drop in yields. So even the new ones that we've just come out with, he told you that we haven't had a chance to get a lot of yield data on these things. They're relatively new. We came out with several varieties a couple years ago, the 1747 and a few of the phytogen lines, Stonewall 5600. I think most people felt that those still had a little bit of a yield, too much yield drag to be where they wanted to be. But now we've got two, and it's really great. They're not just root knot resistant. All of a sudden we have root knot and reniform resistance. You couldn't ask for a better situation. The root knot resistance is a little more proven. We've had these genes. There's two genes in these varieties. One of them reduces reproduction, and one of them reduces galling. And when you take those two things, the result is better yields in root knot fields. I wanted to show you this little table. If you look, 1646, our standard variety, is extremely susceptible to supporting reproduction by root knot nematode. If you look at that top line, this is recovery of root knot nematodes per gram of root at 6 weeks. In the Delta Pine 1646, we'd get 858 in a high pressure field. If you look below there, the phytogen 480, even the 1747, we're reducing these levels of root knot nematodes by 80 to 90% at the end of the year. This means that if we started at 200 this year, at the end of the year, we're down to less than 10. The threshold's 100. That means that not only have you benefited from a higher yield this year, next year, you should be going into a situation where the root knot nematode numbers are low enough that you could get by with, say, your favorite variety, 1646, with a seed treatment or an in-furrow fungicide. You still want to do something about your root knot, but you're going to have a lot less damage. Even in low pressure fields, you can see it went from 270 down to 7 or 12. Once again, these are great reductions and allows you to maybe even plant something like a susceptible soybean afterwards. You can basically insert a root knot nematode resistant cotton variety in as your rotation crop for root knot and allow you to grow something like soybean the next year. So the levels of resistance to root knot are excellent and well proven. We don't have a lot of data on reniform yet, but instead of seeing an 80 or 90% reduction in reniform numbers, what we're really seeing is more like a 50 or a 60% reduction. So we're not getting quite what we get with root knot. We're getting good yields. We've got greatly improved yields in reniform fields, but you're going to have to deal with reniform from year to year to year until we maybe hit the next stage of reniform nematode resistance and see these big numbers in reductions for the following year. The two varieties that we think most people are going to be interested in, if you have root knot nematode, and especially if you have reniform nematode, these two varieties are resistant to both. Delta Pine 2141 and Phytogen 443 are probably what the two varieties you'll be interested in. They're resistant to root knot and reniform nematode. That makes things very good for you. The 2141 is a mid to full maturity variety. 443 a mid maturity variety. If you're worried about bacterial blight, you might want to plant the 443. It is resistant. And you can see the numbers they were tested under. As Mike told you, they didn't release a lot of the 2141. There's very, very little data available on yield or performance in the field yet. These varieties are also resistant. Phytogen 332 and Delta Pine 2143. They probably have very similar performance in terms of root knot and reniform nematode resistance, but they're probably not quite as well adapted agronomically to using in South Carolina. You might want to try them if you like to grow a little bit different maturity groups. Now, if you're 100% positive that your problem is root knot nematode, there are some varieties out there that should do very well for you. The Stonewall, you could use the root knot reniform resistant variety, but if you only have root knot and if you want the Phytogen 400 and the Phytogen 500, Mike showed you, those did pretty well in the variety trial. So those would be something you could look at. Those are their newer varieties. Stonewall 5600, I think the yield's a little bit lower and the performance has been a little bit erratic in terms of the root knot nematode. Phytogen 480, we've grown several years. Excellent resistance to root knot, might have a little bit of a yield drag in it. But 400 and 500 would be good varieties to try. Really, really want to emphasize to you that you need to know exactly what nematodes you have in your field. Now that we have some good weapons, we need to make sure that we're choosing the right ones. We need to know, are you in a root knot field or are you in a reniform field? Usually you have one or the other. You don't have both mixed together. And that can allow you to choose not just the nematode resistance you want, but the nematode resistance with the best available agronomic characters, especially yield. Now, you also need to know, if we're going to eliminate the #1 and the #2 nematode in the state, root knot and reniform, as a yield factor in your field, that sounds great. But realize that Columbia lance nematode, especially south of the lakes and in the coastal plain, Columbia lance nematode is out there in 33% of the fields. And that is true even north of the lakes in a lot of areas. Anywhere you have very sandy fields, you can have Columbia lance, lesion, stubby root, or sting. If those are your problem, the resistance to root knot, the resistance to reniform doesn't do anything for these nematode species. You need to be treating, especially with Columbia lance or sting, you probably need to go in furrow, or you need to go with something like Tello. The seed treatments probably won't even help you for those. So it's just like the entomologist and the weed scientist. You eliminate one species, a new one moves into that void. Mother Nature abhors a vacuum. She's going to fill it with something, and it's usually not something that's good for us. The best thing we can do, we want to manage these resistances well. We don't want to develop root knot nematode populations that can overcome the resistance, or a reniform nematode population that can overcome these resistance genes. We want to keep rotating. If your problem is southern root knot nematode, unfortunately, the only thing you can rotate with is peanut to reduce those numbers. Corn and soybean allow it to build up. They're very good hosts for southern root knot nematodes. But the root knot nematode resistant cotton varieties, once again, they're knocking down the root knot numbers by 90% or more. They might be useful in your soybean or your corn rotations. Reniform nematode, soybean's an excellent host. Corn and grain sorghum are non-hosts, but the trouble is, where we'll see 100 or 200 root knot nematodes, we'll see 2,000 or 5,000 reniform nematodes. So it's going to take probably 2 years to rotate out of cotton or soybean to knock down reniform numbers low enough that we can go in with a susceptible variety. We can go in with our reniform resistant varieties, but not with a susceptible one. And the reason Columbia Lance is such a problem, it's on 33% of our fields, is the only non-host we have is peanut. So if you're in a strong peanut rotation, 2 years of cotton, a year of peanut, two cotton, 1 peanut, that'll control your Lance nematode. But if you're growing more than 2 years of cotton in a row, there's a good chance you've got at least 1 or 2 of our 3 major nematode species. Excuse me. So, nematicides. Telone 2, Telone's been around. I've been working 35 years, and it was here when I came here. It's highly effective. The problem, there's 2 issues with Telone. One is, by the label, you have to apply it 10 to 14 days early, or you can get phytotoxicity. You can kill your cotton seedlings with it. You can kill your seed. You won't get any emergence if you get a crust. And the even bigger problem is, it's $18 a gallon. We recommend 3 gallons an acre. So you're looking at $50+ an acre for the material. Plus you're gonna have to pay at least $20 for the application trip. So it's not cheap. Once again, you better know that you have a nematode problem, not just a nematode problem, but a severe nematode problem, enough to justify using the Telone. One of the ways you can save a lot of money on this is with variable rate applications. Some people call this area management plans, but a lot of people are afraid to try and get into that. They think that you're going to have to get into a very complicated system and get all kinds of aerial photographs with infrared pictures to show them where the damage is. And the truth is, it's not nearly that bad. This is just a regular old picture from a drone. I'm using it not because you need it, but because it shows the distribution of nematodes in this field. This is a severely infested field. But you can see even in here, in the left-hand corner, all the way up the left-hand side, you wouldn't need Telone there. In the very center, you don't need Telone there. There's a lot of growers down in Hampton County in that area and in Southwest Georgia that are doing variable rate applications of Telone. In most cases, they only treat about 1/3 of their field. So they've immediately knocked down the 54 down to about $20 an acre, which really makes it competitive with the other nematicides. But they use yield maps. You know your field better than anybody else. They're using a very simple on-off switch, and it works well for them. It's something you might want to try if you really have a problem, especially now that we have root knot nematode resistance and reniform nematode resistance. Use those. But if you have other nematodes and problems, this would be a good system. The nematode seed treatments, these are really only for use where you have very low levels of nematode pressure. This might be a good thing to put in if you have a little bit of Lance nematode and you're growing a root knot resistant variety. You might want to use the seed treatment to help with your Lance nematodes. They're only going to be effective for low levels of nematodes. Bayer sells vellum and vellum total. These are liquid in-furrow treatments. They're actually moving away from the vellum total. This was a package that some people liked because it had the gaucho mixed in with the vellum and controlled your thrips for you. They're moving more toward the vellum. The vellum does not have the gaucho in it. So if you use vellum, you're going to have to use something else to control your thrips. The vellum treatment's going to cost in the neighborhood of $20 an acre. And it's more effective than the seed treatments, but not as effective as AgLogic or as Tello. So AgLogic, I'll conclude with probably the one that most people have relied on. There's probably everybody who's ever planted cotton in South Carolina or soybeans has used AgLogic, previously Temic. If you're wondering why is it 15GG, the second G is for gypsum. Almost everything they're selling now in the state is going to be gypsum based rather than the corn cob. I think everybody knows in furrow at planting. I want to admonish you not to go to 7 pounds. The label goes to 7 pounds per acre in furrow. I think 5 to 6 is where you need to be. We've actually seen some phytotoxicity, some lower yields at 7 pounds per acre in furrow. And of course, one of the big benefits, one of the uses for AgLogic is it'll give excellent thrips control. You don't need to add another project or product. The one weakness of AgLogic 15GG is that you'll get excellent control for the first 4, maybe even 5 weeks. You'll get a big healthy taproot. You'll be able to grow a cotton crop. You'll be able to make pretty nice yields. But by the end of the growing season, you're going to see a rebound in the number of nematodes you have, and you're going to have to start over the next year. It's just like you never did anything. Your nematodes are going to be as high or higher the next year, and you're going to have to do another control measure. I do want to mention one thing about the AgLogic. You need an online stewardship training and that certificate. It's very simple. You can go to the AgLogic company website, take the training, get your certificate, and that'll allow you to buy and use the AgLogic. If you don't have one of those certificates, you're not going to be able to buy the AgLogic. So that's what I have. David, I guess we'll take questions or whatever we need to do here.
Yep, that's good. We appreciate it, Dr. Mueller. We'll open up, but if anybody's got any questions, you can just unmute yourself and ask or type in the chat, or we'll see if anybody's got anything for Dr. Jones or Dr. Mueller. Anybody? Well, no questions. Mike's open.
David, if somebody has a question later, they can call or email or, feel free anytime.
Sure. The one thing I'd tell you is email us would probably be the best. I don't know about Mike, but on text messages or on phone messages, I'm happy to talk to you on the phone, but you might text me first. I think everybody knows we get so many bogus phone calls. I tend not to answer a phone number unless I recognize it, but go ahead and text us or email us and initiate the conversation that way. It'd be great.
All right. Nothing in the chat, no questions. Well, Dr. Jones, Dr. Mueller, we appreciate y'all coming out and sharing the information with us this morning. And